For more on how COVID-19 is impacting food distribution in the U.S., I want to bring in Lynette Johnson. She's Executive Director of the Society of St. Andrew, a food rescue and distribution ministry. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to first ask you, gleaning is especially in COVID times a vital link between available food and those who need it the most. Can you describe a little more about the process and how it's been applied by various organizations?
Sure, glad to be with you. So this practice of gleaning, which has been around for thousands of years, the idea is that after commercial harvesting has been completed, there's often a lot of food left behind, whether that field was harvested mechanically, and this is just food that's the wrong size, or for whatever reason, food is left behind. So gleaners come in and they pick, dig, or gather whatever food remains in the field after harvest and then share it with agencies that feed hungry people.
And what about redistribution? How does that work in the U.S.? What works, what doesn't?
So I can speak for our group, and the food that we are recovering in fields, we're distributing locally in the same area so that it's local farmers, local volunteers, and then local hungry people who are receiving the food. Often this food is highly perishable, and the food that remains in the field is food that is near the end of its shelf life. So by distributing the food locally as quickly as possible, the food that we're getting out of the field in the morning can be on someone's dinner table that evening.
The gleaners organizations and what they represent really speaks to the inequality in the U.S. in terms of access to fresh produce. There are often discussions about food deserts in America. Talk about some of this issue, the lack of access to produce and other foods, and what types of community it affects.
Sure. It affects every community. I think a lot of times people think that everyone in their community is just like them, and that's not the case. Food deserts certainly are places where there are not grocery stores with access to fresh produce. Then we also have what are called food swamps, where there's a lot of fast food restaurants, but again, no access to fresh produce. So fresh produce is expensive, and if you're hungry, you're more likely to spend the same amount of money purchasing something that's not healthy, but that might fill your stomach faster, whereas fresh produce, which is much better for you, costing more money, doesn't provide as many calories. So it's a real conundrum for people who are hungry, how best to put food in their stomachs so that they have enough.
How has the coronavirus pandemic affected the U.S.'s food supply?
So the U.S. food supply largely runs on two primary tracks. One is food that's going to grocery stores that people go and purchase. The other is food that is destined for restaurants, for dining halls at colleges and businesses and other places, so a real commercial-to-commercial food system. And the commercial-to-commercial food system is what was struck hardest by the coronavirus pandemic, as universities and other congregate areas, restaurants, etc., were closed down. And so more than half the food in this country is destined for those uses, and suddenly there was no market for that food. So that's what really caused the crisis here in the coronavirus pandemic.
Do you think the U.S. can learn from other countries in how it distributes its produce?
I think both in how it distributes and in how it grows its produce, there are lessons that the United States can learn. The United States has long relied on a long-distance relationship with food. That food is transported hundreds or even thousands of miles to reach tables. And that in the coronavirus pandemic has shown us in many ways that it doesn't work very well. So I think more localized food systems are going to provide responses to community needs in ways that perhaps Europe and other smaller countries have long provided, that the United States can learn and actually move back to that sort of system in some ways to help.
If the average person at home wants to fight for food equality, equal access to healthy food, what can they do?
I would say the best thing that people can do to fight for equal access to food on their own, not as part of a larger system, would be actually shopping at a farmer's market, purchasing food directly from farmers at a market, a farmer's market or a farm stand, where the food is, your money is going directly to that farmer instead of through a larger chain. can really help keep local food systems running smoothly.
Lynette Johnson, Executive Director of the Society of St. Andrew, thank you so much for your thoughts.